Hi to everybody. Well, I'm going to present this project that I have been developing in the last 5 years, more or less. It's called Sqlkit because, and it's mainly a PyGTK library to access databases. Well, everybody of you know probably that in Python it's pretty easy to reach, to work with databases and to reach a database. There are many ORM that allow for a good abstraction level so that it's even more simple. What I felt is that there is still a long path from this situation to have a highly interactive way of handling data from a database. Just for example, when I want to browse data of an application, of a different application, or just when I want to write my own application, both very little ones and very complex ones. I wanted to fill this gap. So what are we talking about? It's both a package called Sqlkit to write applications that use databases. Mainly, we're presenting two mega widgets. One to edit data in a form or mask way, and the other as a table. And their son, their mixer, that is editing both form and related data. SQLEdit is an application that, of course, is built on Sqlkit, the package, that allows me directly to go and edit data. The audience, let's say not just you, but of this package is both the end user that may just use the application to get to the data directly, desktop application developers that want to develop an application in PyGTK, or any developer that is just in the need of browsing data from an application he's developing, for example, a web application, but you need to browse some data. And there will be some example on that. I'll focus on the characteristic of the widgets rather than their implementation. The way, what I'm presenting now is some that I consider original ideas of this package, ideas that I personally never saw in other software, and that maybe you may like or not, but anyhow, I think they're original of this. Key point will, some key points I'll present, particularly completion, we'll see what it is, filters, constraints, totals, configurability, and of course I'll need to spend some time on the basis, that is SQL alchemy substantially. I won't say almost anything about PyGTK. 2 rows. The roadmap for this presentation will be just a trailer to start with, SQL alchemy elements, code examples, whose goal is to show how little code is needed to get ready and work. My idea is that the learning curve is very, very simple, flat. Presentation of the widgets to the user, how the user interacts with the widgets, and presentation to the developers, how you can customize that. A printing system that I developed on purpose for this, and the application. Okay, let's start. The tool is SQLEdit. It's a command line tool, just to have an idea, and it can be invoked in these 2 ways. That is, using as argument the URL of a database, or just a nickname whose configuration is somewhere else. Let's say, for example, I use a nickname that is demo, and here is just the demo database that we will use, that is very, we know, great fantasy, director, movies, and so on, okay? And what I can see is that, for example, I can open a table view on films. And you see that here, this is blue. This is blue because this is really a foreign key to some other table, so blue just reminds me that this is not data in this table. And for example, director, and I can have this in, again as a table, or I can have this, for example, as a mask. Okay, so I can browse all the data. Now, let's go back. Let's say we saw that one is from the command line, so no editing, no code to write. Now, the same widgets, but from Python. How long it is to set up widgets like that one. And this is the code you need. Just the imports, by the way. There is a pretty rich demo that you can invoke like this, that has more or less 100 different snippets of code. And for example, this one is the base one, and says exactly all the code necessary to get started with this widget. Now, this is the way to open the table, and this is the way to open the mask. Okay, just the name of the widget is different. All the rest is equal. Now let us see here. You have some way to provide URL of the database and the table that in this case is a string. This one. Okay. Foreign keys are correctly rendered this way. And you see that the widget shows some yellow field that are the needed. You cannot leave it blank. Okay. Now, required information to start are, as we said, table, database, session. The table can be passed as string, but a much richer. And in that case, the database is introspected, so I can get some information. Or a class and a mapper that we will see in a minute what it is. Database as URL as per Sqlkit syntax, and session that again is a Sqlkit object. We will now present very simply these four elements of Sqlkit that are needed to understand Sqlkit. So, you know that Python uses classes, attributes, and assignments, so that if you have an object that is a movie, you can write m equal movie, m.title equal whatever you want. On the other side, database use tables, columns, tuples, and SQL to write something, so insert into movies. So if we want to use our more familiar syntax, we can rely on something a layer that is called ORM, or Object Relational Mapper, that translates each modification we do to the objects into SQL in a certain moment. But that will occur all the times that we modify a particular class only for those objects that belongs to something that we call a session, and the translation occurs when session commit is called. Okay? On the opposite, when we query the database through something like session.query something, all the objects returned belong to this particular class, so that we are sure they will be mapped back correctly. Now, the question is, how can we create this class? The model is easily made with the declarative syntax, can be made in other different methods. But now we're not talking about Sqlkit, we're just talking about Sqlkit, so let's just focus on the easier way, okay? So just an example here is that director class is prepared in a declarative way, and we can see that we have to declare the table in the database, the ID, all the fields that in this case are ID and name, and possibly relations to other tables. In this case, movies, that is the relation to movie. Of course, movie needs to have back a foreign key to here. Clearly, this last movie attribute cannot be devised by introspection of the database. So this is something important that we will get back later. Now, the mapper, each class that has been prepared in this way will have an associated mapper that defines the correlation between the class's attributes and tables columns. In this case, ID and name are mapped directly to columns. There are things that are not mapped directly to a column. Functions is an example, and the other is relationships that we have just seen. Sqlkit uses the mapper and not anything else. The mapper to devise how each field must be represented. So even when you pass, for example, a string, it uses SQL Alchemy to introspect the database, get back a table, create on the fly a class that has a mapper, and takes the mapper and looks which are the fields defined in the mapper. So that really, if you're able to create the mapper in any other way, and if you know SQL Alchemy, you can do whatever you want, you can provide a mapper rather than a class. That means, for example, that right away we can use a mapper that corresponds to a join of two tables, and we can use Sqlkit directly on that one. Let's see, for example, here, this join. We have created a mapper here, okay? And we have reloaded it here, and we see that, in fact, we have some data in this table that comes from the movie table, some data that comes from the director one, and they are all in the same. And we can still edit one and the other, so that, for example, I can write this, and this has been saved, okay? And, or I can, for example, write this one, and this has been saved, okay? Now, this is the view of the code that defines the model used in the database, a little part of the model used in the database. I want just to point you to fact that we have the director that we have almost seen before, the movie, but clearly this, it's a relation. Sorry, how many of you already are familiar with SQL Alchemy? More than half. Okay, so you know what the relationship is. Now you see relation or relationship because it has been changed in the 06, and now it's a relationship. And look, here, when you define the columns, you can add some info that is not treated directly by SQL Alchemy, but is used by Sqlkit just to change the way Sqlkit should render that field. For example, I have fields that I want to be interpreted as images. For example, the cover of the film or a CD, rather than here is the the image of the film. Okay, so these are additional information. But in this case, I can also have enum-like fields and so on. I think I spent already enough time to explain what the director relationship is. Director movies doesn't have corresponds with any column. Its value is a collection of movie objects. You can see like this, for example, D equal director, name equal Fellini, D movies, La Strada, 8 e mezzo. Okay, and clearly movie will have other objects that in turn are related to, for example, genres, actors, and so on. The last thing I skipped a little bit is session. All the object that must be persisted into the database needs to belong to a set that is the object. It's an object called session. And really, a commit and query are attributes, methods of the session. You can provide directly the session, or you can use a DB proxy that is just something easier to fill, because you must be careful to set the session correctly depending on the database. So I provide this one, but you don't need to do that. Now, let us go back to examples. The first is a complete example, the simplest one, but with GTK. The only GTK part here is import GTK, gtk.main. So this is really a working example for this. And we can run it. Okay. Oops. Sorry, it's in Italian. And the next one I will start. Okay. And here it is, and it works like this. Okay. So now let us introduce something more. I want to add the layout. I want to, well, here the layout is not really fancy. It's just all laid out one after the other. Well, of course, here you can see that this is a text, this is a text too, this is the year, and by the way, it's a funny thing to write the year because it has the dot, the punctuation that divides thousands. Here is a date with a calendar, and all this has just been done automatically. This is the director, and it's blue, so that it reminds me it's a foreign key. I have only some possible value that are here. We will see this later. And fields that have an image only have the name of the image. That is not a lot. Okay. Now, we want to add the layout, and we want to change the layout in this way. For example, we only want title, year, director, date release, like this one. Okay. If somebody knows GTK, it knows it has something that is called Glade, and you can create all layout you want. But I don't want to go to that one. I want to be much shorter than that. Look, I just create this string that contains, this string that contains title, year, date release, directory, the image. And clearly it says that I want date release be on the right side of year and image on the right side of directory ID. And I want the title, you see the two slashes, to be spanned one more field, one more column. Okay? So, all I have to do after preparing this string is to pass the string to the layout. You can think to this way of passing the layout is related to XML of GTK Builder or Glade, more or less like REST language. REST markup is related to XML. Next example, I want to add movie. I want to add something. No, sorry. Yes, okay. Sorry. Next example, we want to use, instead of the string movie, we want to add model.movie. Why that? We prefer to use the model because we said before that the model has more information than the string, so that we can use, for example, some information about how to render the image. And that way, we can just simply because we modified and wrote model.movie, we can write something like this one. And we say, I want the image here. I want it is rendered with an image, but that would be the default. since we are using the modal, but we are using this strange syntax that says get rid of the label, because you see here I have a label, a label, a label, and here I don't have any label. I don't want a label, because we will see what the label is for. In the modal there was the information info render equal image, and that's all I need. Okay, so if I go back here, no, sorry, this was the second. Model. Okay. And here it is. Okay. By the way, I decided that description that was normally presented as a single row, I wanted a text area. So I just wrote this modifier, TXS, text, so that it's easily. Now, one more thing, again, with a model, I can also edit relationships. So look at this. This is the way I can have a director with the first name, last name, nation, and all the movies, his movies. All I have to do is simply to add M2M equal movies, and it will show up all the related movies, and I don't have to write anything else. So here, again, probably this, I have not prepared that example, but we have many more in the, yes, it's the demo number 20, okay? Now, let us go, well, in the slides that will be available on my site, there is all the possible modifiers for the layout. I won't spend time on this now. Clearly, you can get to each single widget that is created, that is a GTK widget, and you can modify whatever you want about it with the normal GTK tools. A widget can also be customized so that it represents things I want in whatever way. For example, this is an interesting one, because an integer is represented normally with an entry and with a number. For example, year was 2000 or something like that. Here, these 12 fields are really integers. Each one says which are the days of the month in which bus service take place, okay? So I just wanted to render each single bit as a checkbox. I just created a widget specifically for this one, and I can just represent all these. Now, from the user point of view, let's say completion is one of the things that makes it very useful. A completion is just a way you can avoid to write something when the database already have that kind of information. So let us go back here, for example. This is a movie, and suppose you want to write this one, and I can, writing Control-Enter, I can have all the directory that are present here with the F, and is both starting with F, or like Truffaut, that is not starting, but the F is in the middle. Or I can just query with Shift-Enter, all the starts exactly that way. Or I can ask for all independently from what I have written. Okay. This is just what. Now, which are the key part of this one? One is what I want to filter on. Because, please remember, director ID is clearly in an ID in our director table. So in our movie table, it's just an ID. So when I'm trying to complete, I'm looking in another table that is related to that one, and I have to choose. When I write F, I'm not looking in this table, I'm looking in the other table, in the directory table, and I should decide which is the field I'm browsing. Okay, so in this case, it's the last name of the director. And then I can decide that I want to show something different. For example, in this case, I use the last name as a filter, but I use name and last name and first name as a way to show what should be represented, and I have complete free to choose how to represent it. Really, completion can be configured so that, for example, you can group result sets, or you can filter, because, for example, you can say I want a completion only to return some subset of what it could be returned. For example, I can return for example, completion is here, a dynamic one. Look at this. If I go here, last name, I do like this, and it says Fellini e Olmi only. In this case, there are many more ones, because in this case, I decided that completion should be filtered with only Italian ones, and Italians has been taken from here. So it dynamically understands it, and the way is written here, okay? We will go back to how to programmatically change this one. Filters is another key point of Sqlkit. All the times you need to filter data, and the way Sqlkit does it is pretty simple. So let us go back here for example, in this example, and let's say that I want to understand which are all the last name, whose last name has F. This is similar to what we have seen before, and again is Faenza Truffo Fellini, we already saw it. And we also want to see which of these have done a film that has LA in the title, and we see that we only have 2. Now, and of course, for example, in this case, we have the LA just in one film and not in the other. But so the filters is done both on the table I'm starting from and on possibly all related fields. And this is just because the filter mechanism understands that I have a related one and tries to joins the 2 tables and applies the filters on both of them. But as a programmer, I didn't need to write one single row. This is all done under the hood by Sqlkit. And, okay. Oh, by the way, I forgot to show. The way I can add a filter is just clicking on, well, where is the mask? Oh, here. Clicking on the label, it pops up the filter, and I can use whatever I want as an operator. Or I can click, in these cases, I can click on the header of the column and add the filter. Okay? Filters on dates. A typical situation is that I need to filter on dates in a relative way. I want to see all the invoices of last month, for example. I want to see all the hours I worked for somebody in this year. So let us see something, for example, like this. I'll go back here in a minute because it shows something more than off. Sorry, I should get rid of to show that one. No, because I have a different IP and my database is not listening on that IP. So we can see maybe later if you're interested. How to filter on dates. But for example, you can say simply, I want to see all, let's just see with the films, okay? we have related. Okay, you see, this is date release. Okay, and I can say, let me show all the film that were released in the last 5 years, and this is just epsilon minus 5. That it means since y is the year, so it's just the beginning of the year. Capital Y is just the end of the year. So with this one, I can have an algebra of dates related to the moment I run the query, and that's pretty useful. Or I can say all the film that were released exactly during the it's like from the beginning to the end of that period, and I don't have any film in that. Okay, but in this I do have. Okay. Now, totals is another nice feature of Sqlkit. Totals allow you to show in a table which is the total. Now, I have a very silly one here. Silly one is totals, because I'm adding years. So this is pretty stupid, but anyhow, this is just a way to show. In this case, I can say I want to show all the sum for this one. I can also group by, for example, on the year. Well, this is a stupid example, but the database is not working right now. In a while, I'll start it again. Now, let us see how to browse data from one situation to the other. I can click on the right of a single row and pop a single mask to edit the data. And you see, for example, if I move around, just changes. So it's a way I can browse data. And I can force, and I say, when you pop the window, the mask, just to edit this row, please open it with a specified and registered layout. From the point of view of the programmer, now you have constraints that you can add. What is the constraint? The goal of the constraint is that you normally don't want the user to have visibility on all fields. So you want to limit the visibility of some fields depending on whatever you think. On records, we are talking about records, not columns. So you can set that programmatically. Really, what you do is that you can add conditions and or that will be applied to any query that the user issues. The user can get rid of filters we have seen before, but cannot get rid of any constraints. Since Sqlkit doesn't provide a very simple way to add filters on a query, I added a thin layer that wraps the query, so that allows syntax like this one. For example, add constraints director __ nation. If you know Django, this is inspired by Django at least. Okay, and just to have an example, you can write, for example, director nation equal IT year less than equal 2000 or equal true. And look at here, the comparison between the syntax that is allowed by Sqlkit, and this is the syntax that would be allowed by SQLAlchemy. I'm sorry. Really? Okay. And this is for a join is much even worse. And you can use Django-like syntax, both for constraints, filters, completions. Okay. I try to hurry up a little bit. We have, I provided a mechanism of hooks and signals so that you can configure any widget in a simple way and in many different places like validation, completion, change, state change, layout creation. Hooks are something like this. A simple object, you create one method that has a specific name that is tested. If it is present, it will be run. And for example, you can say validation change false for field these fields. If there is some differences, raise validation error. I don't want you to change anything, and you won't change anything. There are a lot of hooks here, as a list. Now let's concentrate a little bit on a completely different thing that I added to Sqlkit. It is meant to provide a simple way to get to printing. Prepare a print can be a very lengthy operation, so that sometimes it takes too much time, and it's developer's time, because the customer clearly wants something that has font and whatever he wants. I moved this task to the customer because I prepared a template system that uses OpenOffice. So you can ask to use OpenOffice to create the template. It's similar to a module that is called Relatorio. I don't know if anybody of you have used it, but Relatorio uses OpenOffice template, but in a different way, because Sqlkit requires the UNO module be present so that an OpenOffice running instance must be present. On the contrary, it's a little bit simpler, the syntax, because with Relatorio you may need some markers for some Gentry syntax from a template. With my system, the syntax is very simple. We'll see it in a while. And it's a little bit less powerful. For example, you cannot use it for images or not even for Excel format, ODT. How it behaves, like a normal template, it requires a context, that is some variables that would be rendered. This is an example. You have in this part on the left the usual mask that we have used in these cases. I want to prepare something that looks like this. First name, the director, and the nation, and all the films he produced. Okay? And I prepare something that is like this. So we have some dollar object nation, dollar object last name, dollar object first name. But here is the very things. I have plus dollar title, dollar description, dollar year. And now the fact that I have plus here just will go to these three rows. Why that? Because Sqlkit have prepared a context like this. Movies equal and all the objects. So that here, what is particular is that this table in OpenOffice has a name that is movies. That is movies. It can also be table 1, but just because that's the default if you only have one, but you may have different, so it calls movies. And simply the fact that movies is a list with several objects would be enough to say, look into that table. If you find something like plus dollar, then all the dollar of that row will be just the attributes of that object. You understand? So your customer that is trying to get a nice print only have to decide which is the font, which is the dimension of their columns, and anything like that one. This module is called OOO template, is distributed with Sqlkit, but is totally independent from any other part. Okay, let's get to the last part. Okay, Question and answer sono compresi nei 10? No, ok. So, ho ancora 10 minuti di tempo. So, sorry. Now, SQL Edit, I already said that SQL Edit is the tool from command line that allows you to get directly to the database, to the data. What is peculiar and what I present here about SQL Edit? SQL Edit has a rich customization system that allows you to start with something that is just the URL of a database, but then you can go on and add something more so that it just behaves correctly. And, for example, you add simply the model, or you add simply the layout of some tables, and so on. You can add hooks and so on. Now, I really need to start the database now, because, and to do that, wait a minute, if down. Sorry. Okay. Okay, just to show you what I didn't show you before, let's see, for example, these are every day I work, I write on which project I worked. So these are projects I work for. And for example, I want to see how much time I spent in the last year of this project. And I say, okay, here. And I get exactly all the hours I spent. I can say, okay, let me subtotal by month, or let me subtotal by quarter, and well, this is pretty easy. But let's get back to this situation. First of all, the very simple configuration for Nix is just an ini file, and where you write, for example, demo, URL, SQLite, blah, 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 .dp.SQLite, or bank URL, that's my table. You can say which is the table, which is the field list, order by, and so on. But Sqlkit Nix does not, SQL Edit Nix, that configuration file, does not allow you to say which is the layout you want. Does not allow you to say which is the modal or which are the hooks. So you can add them in a directory under .SQLEdit directory. And let us see. Let's suppose the situation in which I have a website of a friend of mine that is a violin, he plays violin, okay? And I need to have a look at some images because they just for some way in the website they are scrambled, they are not correct. So I want to have a look at the data directly. So let's start with this one. And I add okay, so I open up a site with SQL Edit and I see something that probably, if you know Django, you recognize something similar, okay? And in particular, I want to open this table. This table is opened in a very... No, this is not the artist, sorry. This is what I want to show, okay? And this is not really nice way of representing data. So what I do is I add something here, and all I'm adding now is just a layout, that is this one, a layout like this. In this case, much simpler, and a model. This way you can just open up this same it's just the same mask. All I had to add is really a little description of the model and this layout. That's all. And I registered the layout, and they said all the time you open up that table, you open it like this. But let's go a little bit further, and and you see here, I added something more. I added, for example, the discography. And all I had to do to add discography is that I added something like this. And for example, I added this funny thing, major, that is an expander like this one, okay, an open expander. And I can look at this. And just to finish, I show you how I could... Oh, and I also wanted to add this fact that I have the images also in the filter panel, because if I want to filter or I want to see something, I have the filter panel, and I wanted to add this one. And this has been added just adding hooks. And I just said hooks on init. When you initialize it, add widget, filter, add panel, add column, photo in the filter panel. And just this one single row was enough to have in the filter panel the image. Okay. Last thing, just to show a different way of representing the same data. Look, here I have discography and reviews in a tab, note tab. But how could I do that? Well, I just, less layout, I just did this. All this code was necessary to have it. And I say, I'm setting up a layout, but since the mapper already knows that this one, reviews, is a related attribute, already knows that it will render it as a SQL table. And here it is. This is a SQL table. And this is another SQL table that represents something else. Okay. I think it's almost over. Well, localization. It's localized now in Italian, as you can guess. Spanish, Polish, German. And, of course, would be a nice contribution to anybody that likes it to add some other languages. There is a Debian package from Pietro Battiston that is also the author of the logo. Okay. Now, if you have any question, I'm pleased to answer.
Is there an English version as well?
The English version? Yeah, yes. Sorry, you're right. Well, at least it's my English version.
Italian. in English.
Sure. So in fact, I didn't pretend there was an English version.
So no other questions?
Two questions. Like, one, what's the big advantage you see over using Sqlkit on a desktop application versus like Django admin on a web?
No. This is just for a desktop application.
No, but like, why would I do Sqlkit on a desktop and not Django on a web?
Why I prefer a desktop application?
Yeah.
Yes, because, well, I really believe that even if it's very nice to have Django, I like the Django framework, but it's not that easy as this one to set up and to configure, and there are things that are not done so well. And I can show some application that is really customized, highly customized, and to do that to the same degree of let's say operability would be much more difficult using JavaScript on top of Django than using this one. What I hope you understood is that using this one, you really write very little code and you get something amazing in the functionality that has been added. And even the Django admin is not that powerful on many things. So that's why I preferred it, if I answer. Okay.
Yep. One more question is, have you tried to run PyGDK applications, especially with Sqlkit, on Windows or Mac OS?
Yes,
because I
they
run
work
into a whole lot of
on
problems
all platforms. My customer uses half and half, but he personally, well, I mean the customer for which I developed the main application that is pretty heavy one, he's fond of Apple. So an Apple user and uses under Apple. The only thing I couldn't get right under Apple is using the Python Uno module for the printing, because I couldn't find the Python module inside the Apple. I'm not an expert, so if you can find it and let me know how to get to the Uno module, because I couldn't do import Uno from the Python interpreter of Macintosh. But that was really just a later addition. So anyhow, and Windows is using it directly. And on the side, there are information on how to use each of the different operative system.
No other questions, so let's thank Alessandro.
Okay.